Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're shifting gears a little bit. Usually we're wading through these massive stacks of articles on, AI ethics or supply chains or whatever the latest behavioral economics research is.
Right, the usual heavy data-driven stuff.
Exactly. But today the stack is different. It's analysis, film theory, historical context, and it's all aimed at this one specific flickering black and white image from 1954. We're looking at Federico Fellini's classic La Strada.
Yeah, and I think we need to set the ground rules for this right away.
Yeah.
Because usually when people hear classic foreign film, they immediately brace themselves for a lecture.
Or a very dry review.
Right. And this is neither of those things.
Yeah.
We aren't going to tell you whether to stream it, and we certainly aren't going to give you a play-by-play of the plot.
Yeah, that was actually the first thing that struck me going through the prep materials for today. You can know exactly what happens in La Strada. Like, you could read the entire Wikipedia summary, and it still won't prepare you for how the film actually feels.
Not at all.
So the mission today isn't to spoil the story or map out the narrative beats. The mission is really to explore the texture of it.
Exactly. We are diving into a very specific emotional collision that Fellini captured. It's this collision between absolute wide-eyed innocence and just total crushing emotional indifference.
Which is a heavy dynamic.
It is. It's a film about quiet suffering, which, if you listen closely, is a surprisingly loud topic.
Well, let's talk about that quiet aspect, because when I think of mid-century cinema or even, modern cinema, suffering is usually loud.
Oh, absolutely.
It's screaming, it's explosions, it's big dramatic speeches in the pouring rain.
That's the standard Hollywood model, right?
Yeah.
Catharsis through volume. But La Strada is interested in the silence between people.
Right.
It's really about psychological distance.
Right.
It asks this genuinely terrifying question. How can you be standing 3 feet away from another human being, breathing the exact same air, traveling the exact same road, and yet be completely, utterly alone?
Which honestly feels like a question that has only gotten more relevant with time. I mean, you think about how we live today. But before we get too existential, we have to ground this in the reality of the time.
Yeah, the context is crucial here.
The sources make a really big deal about it. 1954, Italy. Why does that specific year, that specific place matter so much for this film?
Because you just cannot separate this film from the exact moment it was born. Italy is post-war. The physical ruins of World War II are still very much a part of the everyday landscape.
Like literally in the background of the shots.
Yes, when you watch the film, if you pay attention to the background, those crumbled buildings, the piles of rubble that isn't a Hollywood set design, that is just Italy in 1954.
So the country is physically broken.
Physically broken, yeah. But the analysis points out something much deeper. Fellini wasn't just filming the physical ruins. He was filming this spiritual landscape of a country that was trying to figure out how to just be human again.
Wow.
Because think about it. The fascism was gone, the monarchy was gone, the war was finally over. But what was left?
It's almost like the hangover after a 10-year nightmare.
Precisely. It's this backdrop of a recovering nation. But the camera ignores the big political picture to focus on these very intimate personal voids. It's macro trauma meeting micro trauma.
And unlike other films of that era, which I know we'll get to in a minute, Fellini isn't really judging anyone here, right? There's no clear hero or villain. He's just witnessing it.
Right. It's a very calm, observant tone. It doesn't point fingers.
That idea of witnessing really comes through in the character archetypes. The film essentially revolves around 2 central figures, and for this deep dive, the sources suggest we don't even really need to use their names because the analysis treats them almost like tarot cards.
Or forces of nature.
Exactly. On one side, you have this force called the Brute.
The Brute. And, it's easy to write him off as just a bad guy, but that kind of misses the whole point. The Brute represents emotional hardness.
Yeah.
He is a figure of pure indifference. He is physical strength, survival, and just a complete rejection of any kind of vulnerability.
Reading through the notes, it seems like his cruelty isn't even really calculated. It's not that he wakes up in the morning planning to be evil.
No, not at all.
It's that he just entirely refuses to acknowledge that anyone else has an inner life.
That's exactly it. He operates like a machine. He eats, he sleeps, he works, he moves. He views the soul as this luxury he can't afford, or maybe something he doesn't even possess in the first place.
Right.
He is basically a stone wall.
And then crashing into that wall, or really just sort of walking alongside it, is the other archetype, the innocent.
The polar opposite.
Yeah.
The innocent represents openness, fragility, and this desperate, almost painful need for connection.
Right.
The innocent looks at the world with total wonder. Even when the world is incredibly bleak, even when they are literally starving, the innocent is looking for magic. They're constantly trying to find a reason to smile.
And what's fascinating is that the tension of the film doesn't come from them, fighting over a treasure map or running from the mob. The tension comes entirely from these two opposing states of being just existing next to each other.
It's the friction of oil and water. They travel together, they eat together. But the analysis brings up this concept of psychological distance, which you mentioned earlier, the idea of being profoundly alone while being with someone.
Yeah, and the sources describe it as an unbridgeable chasm. It's honestly frustrating to read about, let alone watch. You just want them to talk to each other. You want the brute to just look up and get it.
But he can't. And that is the tragedy. It's not found in some massive battle scene. The real tragedy is in the moment where the innocent looks for validation, just a look, a nod, a single word of kindness, and the brute offers absolutely nothing.
Yeah, just keeps eating his soup.
Exactly. It's like shouting to avoid.
There's a really interesting note here in the research about human dignity under indifference. How does the innocent maintain any sense of self when they get zero feedback? I mean, if I smile at you every day and you just stare right through me, eventually I'm going to stop smiling.
Right? That's the central struggle of the film.
Yeah.
How do you stay soft in a hard world? The innocent tries to find meaning in the smallest possible things. A little melody, a stone on the ground, a bug, a brief moment of sunlight.
They're trying to build something out of nothing.
They are trying to construct a soul in a complete vacuum.
It sounds exhausting.
Oh, it is spiritually exhausting. And for the vast majority of the experience, we, the audience, are just watching that gap. We are forced to watch the pain of proximity without connection.
Let's talk about the setting, because that gap isn't just an emotional one, it's physical. The title of the film, La Strada, translates directly to the road.
It does, yeah.
And usually, especially in American culture, we think of the road as this ultimate symbol of freedom. It's Route 66, it's Jack Kerouac, it's endless possibility.
Right, the horizon is a promise.
Yeah, exactly. But in La Strada, the road is something very, very different. The analysis describes it as existential wandering.
Existential wandering.
Which sounds quite a bit less fun than a road trip.
Yeah, this isn't a road from point A to point B. They aren't going to something. They are just moving. The road here is a metaphor for a total lack of roots.
The visual descriptions in the source material really drive this home. They talk about these open landscapes that feel entirely desolate. It's not, beautiful rolling hills and vineyards. It's just dusty, empty stretches of dirt.
And that environment perfectly mirrors the internal emptiness of the characters, specifically the brute. The landscape is barren, just like his emotional life. But if you connect that back to the post-war context we mentioned earlier.
The idea that the old world is just gone.
Exactly. All the old structures, the old certainties were destroyed by the war. So the road represents a state of permanent transition. You're moving, sure, but you aren't building anything. You're just surviving to the next day.
It feels very circular.
It is circular. They go from one bleak town to another, perform their little act, eat, sleep, pack up, and move on again. It beautifully reinforces this core idea in the film, emotional consequence without confrontation.
Okay, unpack that phrase for me, because it comes up a lot in the sources. Consequence without confrontation.
Well, it means that if you just keep moving, you never actually have to stop and face who you are. The brute thinks that if he just keeps the engine running on that motorcycle, he can outrun his own emptiness. He never has to confront the fact that he is completely alone because he's too busy getting to the next town.
So the road is basically a distraction.
It's an anesthetic.
Man, that is a heavy thought. It honestly reminds me of how we use our phones today. Just keep scrolling so you never have to sit quietly and think.
It's the exact same mechanism, really. The technology changes, but that fundamental human desire to avoid the silence remains completely the same.
Speaking of silence and how the film handles it, I want to pivot to the cinematic style for a moment. Because La Strada sits at this really fascinating intersection in film history. The notes keep mentioning this term, neorealism.
Right. So Italian neorealism was the dominant filmmaking style right after the war. Think of films like Bicycle Thieves. These films were gritty, almost like documentaries. They used non-professional actors, they shot on location in the ruined streets, and they focused very heavily on poverty and real social issues. They were all about documenting the social condition.
And La Strada looks like that, right? I mean, it has the dirt, the grinding poverty, the cheap motorcycles.
Exactly. It wears the costume of neorealism. But, and this is the big turning point, Fellini does something really radical here. He shifts away from strict neorealism to what critics started calling poetic realism.
Okay, poetic realism. How does that actually change what we're watching on the screen?
It means that while the surface looks real,
Mm,
the dirt is real dirt, the poverty is real poverty, the story itself operates much more like a fable that's highly symbolic.
okay.
Neorealism is interested in critiquing the social system, while Strada is interested in mapping the soul. Fellini isn't trying to fix the welfare system of post-war Italy here. He's trying to map the human heart.
I see. So, if I'm understanding this, a strict neorealist film would show a character eating to make a point about how hungry they are.
Yes, exactly. A social commentary on widespread hunger. But Fellini shows a character eating to show their deep loneliness. The physical action on screen is exactly the same, but the intent behind the camera is poetic.
So that makes the characters feel larger than life.
Yes. The innocent feels almost like a clown or a fallen angel, and the brute feels like a beast straight out of a Grimm's fairy tale. They are these grand archetypes walking through a gritty documentary setting.
That perfectly connects to this other term in the notes, expressive minimalism. Fellini just strips away all the clutter.
He really does. He uses incredibly simple images to convey massively complex grief. He doesn't need to give a character a 5-minute crying monologue. He just needs a quiet shot of a figure sitting alone by the side of the road, staring at a pebble.
But he doesn't just rely on the images. We definitely have to talk about the sound. You cannot do a deep dive on La Strada without talking about Nino Rosa's musical score.
Oh, absolutely not. It's one of the most famous director-composer partnerships in all of cinema history. And in this particular film, the music isn't just background noise to tell you how to feel. It's doing serious heavy lifting.
Because, as we established, the dialogue is incredibly sparse.
Right.
The brute mostly just grunts or gives orders, and the innocent often literally cannot find the words to express what they're feeling. So is the music essentially filling in those blanks?
It's doing much more than just filling in. The music acts as the true emotional voice of the characters. The brute flat out refuses to speak his feelings. The innocent have all these overflowing feelings but lacks the vocabulary. So the music steps in and articulates what they cannot say.
There's a very specific motif the sources mention, this little melody played on a trumpet.
That melody is basically the soul of the film. It
Mhm.
represents memory. It represents the spiritual consequence of their actions or their inaction.
Yeah.
When that trumpet melody plays, it cuts right through all that thick indifference. It's this thin, incredibly fragile sound placed against this vast, empty, desolate landscape.
So the music acts as the bridge. Even if the characters themselves can't cross that psychological distance we talked about, the music crosses it for them.
For the viewer, yes,
Yep.
absolutely. It connects us directly to their inner worlds. It tells us that despite all the dirt and the endless road and the harshness of the reality, there is a very real, very tender spirit here that is just being slowly crushed.
And that leads us right into the emotional core of this whole deep dive. We've talked about the historical setup, the archetypal figures, the poetic style, but the overarching theme here really is quiet suffering, and specifically the weight of neglect.
The weight of neglect. I really think that's why this film haunts people for decades after they first see it.
Yeah.
We are so used to films where the core tragedy is active abuse violence, shouting matches, betrayal, and while there is definitely harshness in La Strada, the real lingering tragedy is the slow erosion of the spirit that's caused purely by indifference.
It's not a sudden explosion, it's just weathering.
Exactly. It's like water slowly dripping on a stone over years. The innocent is worn down not by active, fiery hatred, but just by the profound lack of love, by being treated as a convenient object rather than a person.
And that brings us right back to that phrase from earlier, consequence without confrontation.
That is the absolute key to understanding the emotional impact here. In a typical Hollywood movie, the innocent would eventually reach a breaking point, stand up, and deliver this huge, tearful speech.
Right, they'd grab the brute by the lapels and scream, "Why don't you see me?"
Exactly, and the brute would be forced to answer. He'd have a breakthrough.
We crave that scene as an audience. We want that emotional showdown.
Of course we do. But life isn't always like that, and La Strada is brave enough to admit that. Often the real tragedy is that the confrontation never actually comes. The innocent suffers silently, and the brute just kicks the motorcycle into gear and keeps driving. The silence just continues. The consequence happens entirely internally, or it happens way too late to change anything.
It's the tragedy of things left entirely unacknowledged.
And that is exactly why the tone of the film is always described as observant. Fellini doesn't step in to save his characters. He doesn't even really judge them. He just watches them. He invites the audience